Holiday season, so whether it's Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah, as we enjoy this holiday season, I simply say to you all, thank you for being here tonight. We certainly look back on 2022 as a year that probably most of us have never seen anything quite like that, huh? And we certainly hope some wonderful things are ahead for us in 2023. My name is Scott Murray, and I'm delighted to be back to serve as your Master of Ceremonies tonight, and we've got all kinds of things to share with you. And as I said, though, we'd like to stay on time as best we can and hope to get you out of here by 11 o'clock tonight. So, okay, I just wanted to see if you're all listening, all right? And so, what I'm going to do is, for those of you that have attended this program in the past, you're well aware of the fact of what we do, and we certainly welcome all of you back. And for those of you that might be here for the first time, where might you be? Look at that. Well, that's good. We've got some new timers. Well, fantastic. Well, welcome to you all. We're delighted to have you here, and we're going to hear more about today's program and what's coming up in Season 2 in just a sec. But first, we're going to start our program with the Pledge of Allegiance. You see the flag being brought forward here on the stage. And also, that's going to be followed by the Texas Pledge, led by our good friend Bob Epstein. And then we've got the invocation. That will be delivered by yet another great guy. Our good friend, Mr. Barry Brown, will be up here on the stage. So you're already ahead of me. I was going to have you all please stand and remain standing for our invocation as well. All right?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Okay. How are you? Good to see you.
Okay, welcome, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Join me in prayer, please, sir. Our Father in heaven, Almighty God, we thank you for this time that we can spend together to enjoy a meal and fellowship and to learn important things we need to know about the defense of our nation. We pray your blessings upon our speaker, and we're grateful for his years of dedicated service to our country. Thank you for the food we will enjoy this evening, for those who prepared it and who serve it. You have truly blessed us. Father, it said we live our lives on this earth in three phases. We're either walking into a trial, we're walking in the midst of a trial, or we're walking our way out of a trial. We are living in trying times for sure, but we trust in your sovereignty and your plan. In this special time of year when we celebrate the priceless and timeless gift of a Savior and the coming of Christ, I'm reminded in my own life, Christ delivered me from darkness and into newness of life and freedom. Thank you, Lord. I'll praise you forever for that gift and for your matchless grace. Lord, we ask for your blessing and protection for all the men and women who wear the cloth of our nation, many of whom are and will be far away from home during this holiday season. Give them comfort, safety, and courage to complete their missions and to come home to their families and to a grateful nation. We pray for your wisdom and guidance for our leaders in government. We pray for the joy of Christmas season to fill our hearts and minds with the boundless love that you have for us and to carry that love to those around us. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Now, let's have a seat, ladies and gentlemen. One other thing while I've got the microphone, we had a little glitch between our electronic registration page and the actual communications with the club here for meals. The meal choices, as you registered online, showed beef, chicken, and fish. The meat meal that was chosen is actually a glazed pork loin. So if you have a problem, you chose beef and you don't want pork, then all I can tell you at this point, because all the meals are prepared, is we're relying on the generosity of our people to make exchanges. I've got a chicken plate. I'm glad to give someone that doesn't want pork. So work around your table, see if we can work that out. If you absolutely can't eat pork, we have to do our best to make it happen when the meals are served. So thank you for your patience and for bearing with us on that. It will not happen again. Thank you.
Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a couple of things to take care of, so if I can get your attention, We'll go through that as quickly and efficiently as we can. Again, we welcome you all, delighted to have you all here. You may know that this is the second meeting since we switched to a dinner format, and we learned a lot from that first one, believe it or not. That's always a good thing. And our objective tonight is to streamline the administrative part of your program and provide more time for our speaker and for you to have the opportunity to interact with the speaker as well. So along those lines, please feel free to begin your salad course right now. Please go ahead and enjoy your salad while we take care of a few other details. We have several retired flag and general officers and many veterans in our audience tonight, so thanks to each and every one of them for their service. Let's put our hands together and thank them all very, very, very much. All right. First responders, veterans, we also have several Air Force Junior ROTC cadets and Civil Air Patrol cadets in the audience, along with their parents, and their instructors are here as well. So if you happen to be a cadet or a parent of an instructor, would you please, let's see, I'm trying to see where they might be. Please stand, don't be bashful. ROTC and the parents and the instructors, there they are. Great to have you on board. And yet another guest that we've got in the audience tonight, I'd like to recognize Dr. Steve Holt, Executive Director of the VA North Texas, which is so very important to our veterans. Where might he be? Don't be bashful, there he is, all the way in the back. Great to have you here. And we also recognize our elected officials, and two that have been very faithful supporters are here with us tonight. Let's see, we have our invocation was delivered by, let's see, okay, we've got that, okay, Al Zapanta, are you saying, where's Al? Is right over here. Al Zapanta is the Irving City Council member. And Henry Lesner, the mayor of Fairview, which is where we are, here in Fairview and McKinney, right? Where might he be? Is he here? Out directing traffic right now, okay. Good deal. Well, tonight we are most honored and certainly happy to have with us yet another faithful supporter who has, up until now, been a candidate for office, but on January 3rd, he will be sworn in as our elected representative from the Texas 3rd Congressional District. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight. We are delighted to welcome and recognize Congressman-elect Keith Self. How about it, as I look out there, are there any other elected officials that we might not have noticed when they came in? Don't be bashful if you happen to be an elected official. All right, okay. Well, we thank you all, those of you that stood, those of you that might not have, but we thank you all for your service to our community and certainly to the great state of Texas. And of course, we have with us our guest speaker tonight, General Kevin Chilton. There's the good general right here. And we have a bio on him that goes from here to Lubbock, so we'll hold off on that and share that with you a little later on. All right, well tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to minimize fundraising, so no auctions or sponsor presentations this evening. We thought we might try that and see how that goes. However, one thing that has been very, very popular is what we call our 50-50 raffle. This is where we draw a ticket at the end of the evening to split the proceeds from our raffle ticket sales. And I think last meeting, believe it or not, we made $80,000. Just kidding. But we did make 800, so that's pretty good too, huh? So this evening, what we're going to do is we're going to donate a share of the 50-50 raffle to the Wounded Airmen Project in the name of our guest speaker. So even if you don't win your contribution, you know it's going to go to a good cause. So that's great. I'm really excited to hear that. In addition, tonight, we're going to be giving away a door prize, a beautiful signed, numbered, professionally framed print by noted wildlife artist Neil Anderson. And is that it right there? Is that the one? Okay, very good. All right, and you see the price of the ticket up there, ladies and gentlemen, so please take advantage of that. We'd love to have everybody, no matter what amount of money you'd like to spend. It's all for a great cause, and as I just said, Wounded Airmen Project going to receive 50% of it, so that's pretty special. And of course, the other 50% is going to you if you happen to be the lucky one. So thank you very much for taking part in that. Hopefully, you had an opportunity when you checked in to buy some tickets for the raffle. If you didn't buy your tickets when you did check in, we're still going to give you yet another opportunity. Patty McCoy, where's Patty? There she is, right there. that young lady has a big roll of them, and she'd be more than happy to help you out, and she's going to be circulating during the administration portion of the program. So just hold up your hand and wave to her, and she'll be more than happy to fix you up. Again, for those of you that might not be aware of it, they're $5 each for a ticket for a raffle, or $5 for 20. So if you spend $20, you get an extra ticket. So $5 for 20 or $5 a piece, and then at the end of the program, we're going to have that drawing to see who's going to be the lucky one to walk home with the $50 or 50% of the proceeds, and hopefully a lot of dollars. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge the support of our sponsors, especially our Nimitz-level sponsors, Credit Union of Texas and Rover Petroleum, our Persian sponsors, our Texas Republic Bank, the Dickey Foundation, and Bob and Robbie Epstein. And you can see their logos on the slide behind me, and certainly want to thank each and every one of them for their kindness and for their generosity. So what do you say we put our hands together and thank them all for what they've done? And don't forget, if you'd like to be a sponsor at this event, in upcoming events during this great series, you can do so. All you've got to do is see any NDBS officer, and they'd be more than happy to help you out. Well, let me give you a little explanation of the sequence of events tonight and what we're going to be doing. First of all, our topic is space, a war-fighting domain. And we are most honored to have with us the good general that I just made note of just a short time ago. He's going to be our speaker and give us all kinds of expertise on this incredible topic. So we're really excited that General Kevin Chilton is here for us, and he'll be sharing all of that information a little later on this evening. After dinner, I'm going to turn the microphone over to our good friend, General John Campbell, who's going to introduce our program, and he'll at the same time introduce our speaker. But first, I'd just like to say a few words about our actual agenda this evening, so stand by for that. In just a few minutes, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is the outstanding Heritage Ranch staff will begin service. They're already picking up some of your plates from the salad and what have you, but they'll be out here with dinner momentarily, and we have a unique and very special way of identifying which entree you selected. You will have a picture of a cow, a fish, or a chicken. Is that right? And I guess I had a broccoli for the vegan meal as well, and now we've got a pig for the pork, or is that what we've got? Okay, very good. Or vegan if you'd like. So you'll notice that we have a no-host bar in the room as well. So if you'd like a beverage other than tea or water, we ask that you please serve yourself right over there. There he is. He's waving his hand. That's our official bartender this evening. So just go see him and take care of yourself if it's anything other than tea or water. Okay? And also, because our programs also generate lots of questions in consideration of our speaker's time and yours, we plan to stop at around 7 o'clock this evening, okay? So we're going to keep this moving as quickly and efficiently as we can during the course of the night. Once the program is concluded, you are welcome to certainly stay and use this as an opportunity to network and talk with our guest speaker and certainly other representatives of our sponsoring organizations that might have gathered here with us today. Finally, we draw our 50-50 raffle winner and our door prize winner that's going to be right at the very end of the program, so don't leave too early or you'll miss out on that because you have to be here to be a winner. So that said and done, dinner is now going to be served. I do want to make you aware of the fact, for those of you that are members of MOWW, Military Order of the World Wars, they had their annual Christmas party, the local chapter here at the Park City Club this past Tuesday, which oddly enough, or coincidentally enough, happened to be on the eve of the 81st anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So I had gone out with some of the incredible servicemen that have, some of them that are here tonight, and I was asked if we'd put together a just a few interviews of those gentlemen about why they got involved in the service and what it meant to them and just what their legacy might be that they leave with their families and what have you. And so we did that, and they all were great. We had them over at the studio about a month ago, and then we got to thinking, now what are we going to do with all these great interviews? How are we going to put these together? What are we going to do? Well, when they called last week and they said, can you put something together for the Christmas program, Scott? I said, sure, we can do something. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, December 7th, for Pete's sake, let's maybe start with Pearl Harbor. And I have a television production company with my son after I retired from doing the news every night. And so we had been in Pearl Harbor on the 75th, and we'd also been in Normandy on the 70th anniversary of D-Day. So took some of that footage, and some of the people were involved in that, and put it with all the gentlemen right here from the great state of Texas that were there as well. So we thought the little mini documentary runs about 15 minutes. So what we thought we'd do, we're going to give the wait staff here just 5 minutes or so to get the meals on the table, so you're not bothered by everybody walking around. We'll step aside, we'll show you that video, and then we'll get the good general up here, General Campbell, to come up here, and he can begin our program, and we'll be underway so we can stay on time. So enjoy yourself right now for just 3 or 4 minutes. This would be a great time if you had to go to the bar or go to the men's or ladies' room. Now's a good time, and then we're going to get right back up here in just 3 or 4 minutes as soon as all the plates have been served. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. We're delighted to welcome you all, and we look forward to a great holiday season, but what a great way to kick it off with all of you here tonight. So thank you again.
So before we get to the rest of the program, I want to give you a little bit of info about what's coming up. By the way, we're not going to take a break, so I've got a couple of minutes of introduction here. If you need to make a run to the men's room, ladies' room, it'd be a great time to do it. So next slide, please. Our next program comes up pretty quickly on January 29th, and we have some dynamite programs on tap for you. The next one is going to be a panel discussion on air and naval power of the 21st century, and we have a particularly distinguished panel. We've invited retired Admiral Jim Fogo, who was the last job in the military, was commander of the United States Naval Forces Europe-Asia. He's now the Dean of the Center for Maritime Strategy and affiliate of the Navy League. Our other panelist is Miss Heather Penny, who is a senior resident fellow at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies and is a colleague of General Chilton's. Heather is not only one of the leading air power authorities in the country, she's also well known for the mission she flew on 9/11 as a young lieutenant in the D.C. National Guard. I won't divulge any more of that story. It's easy to find, and you'll probably hear from her when she's with us. On April 2nd, we're honored to have scheduled Admiral John Richardson, 31st Chief of Naval Operations, who will discuss the current great power competition, and we'll wrap up Season 2 on June 4th with a special program where we present the second Sam Johnson Defender of Freedom Award. You may remember last year we honored Scott Murray with that. We have some equally qualified candidates this year. So next slide, please. So tonight we'll use the same Q&A procedure we use every time. I won't belabor it, but there are 3 ways you can get a question to the speaker. If you got your phone handy, you can send your question to that address, nebs.questions@gmail.com. I'll monitor that during the Q&A session and feed those into the discussion. There are some 3x5 cards on each table. If you'd rather just write your question on a card, hold it up, and we'll get a runner to come around and pick it up. Bob Gaybauer, can you do that? There's Bob. Okay. And finally, we'll take questions from the floor. And this time, I'll probably rotate between the three methods of questioning. If you want to ask a question, hold your hand up and get a microphone. We'll bring you a mic because we want to hear your question, and we want to get it for the tape. We know we're going to have a lot more questions than we have time, so at some point we'll cut it off. Scott said 7 o'clock in. Well, let's make it 7-ish, depending on how we're doing, and I'll kind of read the body language, and as long as nobody's looking at their watch, I figure we still got, we're going to go. As always, we're going to videotape this. Once we have it approved by the speaker, we'll post it to our website, and it'll be there for you. So our program today is entitled Space, a Warfighting Domain. Space has been the headlines in some really good ways for the last few years because of all the cool things that have been going on. One that really fascinates me is the commissioning of the James Webb Space Telescope. parked in a parking spot out beyond the moon, and with sensors that can really look back to the beginning of the universe. And it brings back some pretty cool pictures like this, which shows the formation of galaxies. So that's telling us so much about the world and the universe that we live in. Some other recent events include the launch of the NASA Space Launch System mission, the Artemis 1. And if you watch today, that was a 25-day mission to transit the moon. It splashed down at 11:40 this morning off the Gulf of Mexico. And what a great achievement for NASA and for Boeing. It's nice to see that finally go off. And that's a precursor to the manned mission in a couple of years. The enormous success of commercial space companies like SpaceX, which has become the world's leading launch provider, and even as we speak today is building the world's largest rocket ship a couple of 100 miles south of here down in Boca Chica, Texas. And that's someday going to take Elon Musk to Mars. Now, some would say it can't be too soon if you're a Twitter investor, but he's certainly got the ambition. The growth of space tourism, you've seen pictures of almost routine now flights of private individuals into space on rockets built by SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Virgin Galactic. And all the things we take for granted which come from space. Like, how many people use GPS to navigate here tonight? GPS is that utility that we take for granted, just like water and power. It's provided by the constellation in space, and it's, again, one of the things that comes from space we rarely think about. So anyway, I could go on and on. It's tempting to talk about space and all the great things that happen. We tend to view space as a benign and peaceful environment with open access and freedom of action and innovation. Unfortunately, that's not the reality of the world we live in today. Space has become a military high ground, and operations in space are becoming more contested, with both Russia and China demonstrating the capability and the stated intent of holding our space assets at risk. And more we're viewing space as a place where we may fight the domain for operations like the sea and air domains that we have fought in for years. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. That's a brief precursor. We have with us a speaker who is one of the leading thinkers on space operations and one of the most visible and articulate advocates for the space capabilities that we need to prevail in the great power competition we face. General Kevin Chilton was an Air Force fighter pilot and test pilot, served for 11 years in NASA. He flew 3 space shuttle missions, was the mission commander on STS-76, his 3rd mission, returned to the Air Force in 1998 and served in a number of key command responsibilities, including commander of Air Force Space Command, which essentially became the U.S. Space Force. His last assignment was the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, responsible for the operation of the United States nuclear deterrent forces. Today he serves on a number of boards and councils and holds the Explorer Chair at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies Space Power Advantage Research Center. And by the way, his wife, Kathy, is retired Major General Kathy Chilton. So they have quite a blue household. I want to recognize, by the way, his future son-in-law, Jay Thompson here. So Jay, good luck with that, with in-laws like that. General Chilton, we're pleased and honored to have you tonight. Please come help me welcome General Chilton at the stage.
Thanks, Sue. Appreciate it. Well, what a pleasure it is for me to be with you here tonight. And I've got to begin by thanking General Campbell for reaching out to me and inviting me to join you this evening. Otherwise, I live in Colorado, so otherwise I wouldn't be here. So, Soup, thanks so much. And it's always a pleasure for me to come and have the opportunity to speak about space and how important it is to our national security, and how we've changed in the way we look at the space domain with regard to national security. A necessary change, I would argue. But again, a little bit, General Campbell gave you my background. I was a fighter pilot. I studied engineering in school. Honestly, watching this last video, I felt kind of bad because I joined the Air Force for less than noble reasons. I wanted to be a pilot since I was a little boy. I grew up near LA Airport, looking out the window instead of at the teacher. And I wanted to be a United Airline pilot, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to get flying lessons. I knew it wasn't going to happen at my local airport. So fortunately, I was able to get into the United States Air Force Academy, but with the sole intention of serving my commitment after becoming a pilot and going to work for United. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to United Airlines. I fell in love with the United States Air Force and my service there. And it gave me so many opportunities and so many wonderful times. I tell young people that the Air Force gave me an education, gave me a skill, put clothes on my back, a roof over my head, and issued me a wife. Because Kathy and I met at Air Force Test Pilot School. We were classmates. Kathy, I'm really proud of my wife. She's only the second woman in the history of the Air Force to graduate from the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School as a flight test engineer. So I fell in love with flying fighters, and I wanted to be a test pilot because I'd been exposed to that as a cadet. And I had a buddy who went off to be an astronaut, and I called him up one day and I said, "Do you like it?" He says, "Yeah, and I think you'd like it too." So I threw my hat in the ring, and I was fortunate enough to get selected. And I only bring that up because everything I learned about space and space operations began at NASA in the middle of my career after 11 years in service in the Air Force. At NASA, I learned how to do rendezvous in space. I knew how to do proximity operations, which means fly up next to a satellite and fly around it and maintain control of your vehicle. I learned how to do docking, physically dock to another satellite. In fact, my last mission, we docked to the Mir space station with the space shuttle Atlantis. I worked down at the Cape in launch operations. I worked in mission control as a capsule communicator. So I learned command and control in space. I learned operations in space. I learned launch. But in those days, if you were in the military and you went off to NASA, your parents' service kind of said, "Have a nice life." There was really no pipeline to come back into the Air Force. That changed in 1996 when a general named Joe Ashey, who was the commander of Air Force Space Command and U.S. Space Command at the time, just changed the policy and came down and told us if we wanted to come back, he wouldn't make us, we could. And so Kathy and I talked about it for a while, and we decided to throw our hat in the ring and come back to the Air Force because we both love the Air Force. And I'll never forget, I came back in 1998, and this is a time period where we were the world's uncontested superpower. And our operations in space were uncontested. No one could match our capabilities there. No one threatened our capabilities there. But I remember reading this white paper in 1998, written by the Chinese. They had observed how we fought our wars in the 1990s, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, of course, Desert Storm. And they saw how we utilized space to increase our effectiveness on the battlefield, whether it was over-the-horizon communication with our satellites, GPS-guided munitions, where a single airplane could take out a target as opposed to a fleet of 100 in World War II. They watched and studied us, and they concluded in this white paper, they're very transparent. They said, we will never be able to match the U.S. force on force, so we must go after their key vulnerabilities, space being one of them. Command and control, think cyber, the other one. And they started in 1998 to execute that strategy. And so where are we today? We are still operating in space and using those very same capabilities that we developed throughout the years, whether they be missile warning satellites, weather satellites, global communication satellites, GPS satellites. We are still using those capabilities. Satellites that were designed not to survive an attack because there was no threat. They changed from being a convenience to a dependence. Our military operations in air, land, and sea today depend on those space capabilities. It's the way we fight. It's just part of our nature now. And suddenly, we have two players that are holding those capabilities at risk. And one, of course, is China. Now, holding each other's satellites at risk actually goes back historically to the Cold War. During the Cold War, the Soviets developed an anti-satellite capability that could launch into space, rendezvous, get close to one of our satellites, and then collide with it and set off an explosion to destroy it. We knew they fielded this capabilities back in the early 1980s. So we countered that by developing our own anti-satellite capability, which was launched off an F-15. And we actually demonstrated it. They developed it while I was at test pilot school. I remember going down and seeing the rocket on the bottom of the airplane. And we launched that, tested it, and destroyed one of our satellites to prove to the Soviets that we could play that game too. But the result of that was a tacit agreement between us and the Soviets not to go any further with those capabilities. Because we understood, each side understood the dangers of miscalculation that could lead to a potential World War III between then the two great nuclear powers. So the concept of warfighting in space, or attacking one another's space capabilities, actually started back in the early 80s. But we set that aside and said, that's not a good idea. Well, in 2007, when I was at Air Force Space Command, commander of Air Force Space Command, the Chinese launched and tested their own anti-satellite weapon. And they shot one of their own satellites down in space, or blew it up, creating over 2,000 pieces of debris, which we're still dodging today. The International Space Station still dodges on occasion. A very irresponsible act. And we accused them and held them up in front of the world as being irresponsible in that activity, hoping to shame them into stepping away from it. But they did not. They continued to follow the strategy they laid out in 1998, which was to field capabilities that could deny our utilization of those space assets, which we need for our national security. And it's not just our warfighting capabilities that are so dependent on these systems. The GPS satellite constellation is absolutely essential to the American banking and finance systems. It's essential to our energy systems. It's essential to our electrical grid across the country. Without the timing signal from GPS, all of those things stop working today. A further sign of our dependence on these systems. And China holds those constellations at risk today. They not only tested, but they fielded the capabilities. So today, China has direct ascent anti-satellite capability that can attack our satellites in low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and even our geosynchronous satellites, which hover over the United States and provide us our global communications, direct TV, the things that we're so accustomed to. Not only that, they've fielded ground-based lasers. They can shoot lasers at our reconnaissance satellites that take pictures of the Earth and disrupt them. They've developed ground-based lasers, or jammers, electronic warfare devices that can jam our GPS signal. So they don't have to necessarily kill the satellite, they can just jam the satellite. They can jam our radio communication satellites as well. So they've executed this strategy quite well, and now it's time for us to react to it. Actually, it's past time. I don't know of a single commander of Air Force Space Command, which stood up in 1982, who has not predicted that one day space, just like air, land, sea, and subsurface, would one day become a place where human beings would fight. Maybe robotically, and certainly that's what we're talking about today, but it would become a warfighting domain. However, those warnings fell on deaf ears for many years for a very good reason. There was no one to threaten us, certainly in the 1990s. But that's changed. That's changed now. And it took us a while to wake up. In fact, it wasn't until the end of President Obama's administration in his last year that finally our policy changed to recognize that space was a contested domain and that indeed it would become a warfighting domain. We're behind. We are behind because we started late at addressing this. So we've done several things to prepare for this, or to try to catch up. One is the formation of the U.S. Space Force as a separate service. So now we have the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and the Space Force. Not to be confused with United States Space Command, which confuses me, frankly. So if it confuses you, you're okay. So we have the services whose job is to organize, train, and equip men and women to provide those forces, air, land, sea, and space now, to these gentlemen called combatant commanders. Central Command, European Command, Indo-Pacific Command. If you think back to World War II, this is Eisenhower and Nimitz, okay? Back in the States was Marshall and King. They were the services. The warfighters were Eisenhower and Nimitz in the Pacific, right? We have the same construct today. So U.S. Space Command is a warfighting command. U.S. Space Force is a service that generates capability to give to this commander to fight with. Does that make sense? Standing up these two organizations is really important. It's added focus to the mission set of preserving our capabilities in space, and actually, what I think is equally important and new because of our change in policy, being able to hold at risk Chinese and, if necessary, Russian satellites, so that if we ever get in a fight, we can at least level the playing field. And ideally, we would dominate the playing field by denying them their ability to use their GPS satellites, their communication satellites, their intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites, their communication satellites, while we preserve that capability. The worst case, ladies and gentlemen, the absolute worst case, a day I would never want to see, would be the day when we lost all our capabilities in space, but they retained theirs. There would be a lot of dead Americans in that conflict. And so it's an urgent time in our nation's history for us to develop the capabilities that we need to fight and win in space if necessary. I say if necessary. A lot of people think the mission of our military is to fight and win our nation's wars. I don't believe that. I think the number one mission of anyone in our service is to be so good at their job that we deter warfare from ever happening. In other words, no one dares to take us on. And you cannot do that mission, that most critical mission, without being stronger than the adversary. And we're playing catch up in space right now. And that's why we need to wake up, which I believe we have, make the appropriate investments in this area to make sure we are prepared to deter our adversaries from even attempting to attack our space capabilities. And if deterrence fails, to beat them. That's what our job is. That's what our job is in the service. So quickly, I'd like to kind of run through, this is, and people go, well, this must be rocket science. It's not rocket science. What we need to be prepared to to do our mission in space in the warfighting domain is the same capabilities that every other warfighter in air, land, or sea demands. First is situational awareness. What's going on in the area that I have to conduct my operations in? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Who are the neutrals? Where are they? What capabilities do they have? And hopefully with good intelligence, what's their intent? So I can get ahead of them in the fight. Space needs the exact same things. They need to be able to surveil the space domain, know what's up there, who the good guys are, who the bad satellites are, who the neutral satellites are, and they need to know when the bad satellites maneuver, why they're maneuvering, and what their capability is. Are they risking our satellites? So, situational awareness. Second thing every warfighting organization needs are forces, capabilities. Space Command in the past just provided services to the other services. GPS, communications, missile warning. They had no warfighting capability. In fact, when I was a commander of Air Force Space Command, I was not allowed to use those words by policy in a speech. I couldn't say space superiority. I couldn't say warfighting in space. It was against U.S. policy. Because we, some say naively, believed we could lead by example and the Chinese would follow suit. Well, we were already shooting behind the duck by that time. So we need we need those same capabilities to be survivable, so they can continue to provide those services to the air, land, and sea forces. But we also need to develop new capabilities now that can hold our adversary satellites at risk. And you don't necessarily have to kill a satellite, destroy a satellite, to make it non-functional. Every satellite has a link, a communications link to a ground site, a satellite dish, where commands are sent to the satellite or data is received from the satellite. There's a whole network of command and control that sends messages up to the satellites to tell them what to do. There's ground observation sites in our hemisphere on the Andean Ridge in South America that the Chinese operate under university agreements, and the Russians for that matter, that surveil the skies, that help them find out where our satellites are. And if they don't know where our satellites are, they can't attack them. So that infrastructure is also a vulnerability. We need to develop capabilities to hold at risk. Because if we take out any piece of that armor, any piece of that armor, we neutralize their capability. So we need forces that are able to do that. Some in space, some I would argue that come off airplanes, they come out of Army tubes on the ground and come out of naval ships. Just like the United States Army depends on the Air Force to provide close air support, just as the United States Navy depends on the Air Force to do harbor mining operations from the air and hold ships at risk with some of our cruise missiles, this inter-service interdependency means that it's not just the Space Force's job to do this. The other services need to field capabilities to support the combatant commander, the U.S. Spacecom combatant commander, so that he can do his job. So it's going to be an integrated fight, and we're just now starting to think about that. We have not really started to cross that Rubicon on how we can work closer together to achieve the objectives we need. The third thing every warfighter needs is an ability to talk to his people in the field, command and control, the ability to plan and execute operations. In the past, all we had to do was keep the satellites going around and around and providing GPS signals. Now we're going to have to maneuver satellites in space. We're going to have to dodge adversaries in space. We're going to have to perhaps attack adversaries in space. This is a whole new set of command and control capabilities that are going to be required for the Space Force to field, organize, train, and equip, and provide to the U.S. Spacecom combatant commander. And then most essential, I think, is we need trained and ready people. In 1998, as recently as 1998, I know it seems like yesterday to me, 24 years ago now, when I came back from NASA into the Air Force to Air Force Space Command, the commander of Air Force Space Command was a fighter pilot. The vice commander was an ICBM officer. The director of operations was a fighter pilot. The director of intelligence was a Air Force pilot. Our director of requirements was an Air Force bomber pilot. We had no space officers that had risen to the rank of general officer in 1998, with few exceptions. So we hadn't developed this career path to leadership positions of knowledgeable people in the space domain. Well, it's changed. When I came back in 2006 and 2007 to command that very same command, all of my direct reports had space capability. In fact, I picked a fighter pilot to come in because I wanted that ethos on my staff, along with the space expertise we had developed in those 8 years in the Air Force. We have to hire the right people, we have to train the right people, and we're going to have to train them for a new mission. And one thing we did not do in the old days, because we didn't feel we need to, is we did not field the training devices they needed. There were no simulators. If you were an operator of the GPS constellation, you learned on the console that was operating the satellite. You could do that when no one's threatening you, but if you have to dodge a threat, you need to have a simulator where you can practice these type of things, where you can practice what warfare might be like in space. So it's unfair if we don't field these training devices for our men and women who are now called Guardians in the Space Force. They need training devices for how to fly their satellites when they're under attack, how to fly attack satellites if we field those, how to do command and control without having to practice it on the actual command and control equipment we're using today. Just like every other service does, we need to have the training facilities, training ranges, weapons schools, doctrine centers that every other service has and has developed to exquisite levels. So these are the things we need going forward. The Space Force is on its way. They're not sitting on their heels. They're working this. But it'll be their third year of existence this Christmas. So they're a young force. They're a small force. But there's a lot to be done, a lot to be invested in. Situational awareness, forces and capabilities, command and control, trained and ready people. And then we've got to exercise, practice, and be ready. And demonstrate to our adversaries that it would be a huge mistake if they decided to take on the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'll conclude my remarks and look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay with you?
Sure, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, General Chilton, for that great intro. So we're going to go into the Q&A, and Chuck, do we have a microphone we can use for the questions?
I've got this on. This will work for me. Oh, to pass around the room?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So again, I remind you of the website where you can send your questions. So you said in your remarks, it's absolutely true that given the choice, we would rather not fight.
Correct.
We need to be prepared. So that talks to deterrence. How do we deter our adversaries in space? What do we need, and can we do that now? And if not, how do we get there?
Right. Well, I think where I would focus my energy, there's two things we need to do. Improve the resilience or survivability of the satellites we have on orbit. Unfortunately, most of those satellites were designed in the 1980s, 1990s, and they last a long time, and they were designed during that environment where there was no threat to them. So they don't have any defensive capabilities inherently built into them, which is why they're so vulnerable to these capabilities that the Chinese have fielded. But we will replace them. And as we replace them, we're looking at new ways to make it more difficult for them to eliminate those capabilities in space. One concept that is going to be tested next year will be akin to what Elon Musk is doing with his Starlink, is put up a large number of satellites. Instead of having 5 satellites that do a function, you put up 100. And now the adversary has to kill a larger number of satellites to take away the capability. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is you can design in to the next generations of satellites self-protection maneuvers. Having done rendezvous myself in space and docking, if the target I was docking to, the space station, it happened to be the Russian space station Mir in those days, but it was very stable. And so all I had to do was fight orbital mechanics to fly up and dock to it. Well, if on the way in there it moved, that would have made my problem infinitely more difficult. So you can design maneuverability into your satellites that you put on orbit to complicate it. Simple things that we've seen in other domains, decoys, things like that can help fool systems that are coming after you. So that's the defensive side and the resilient side. On the other side, I think you need to have offensive capabilities that can not only hold their satellites at risk, but can hold the satellites or the systems at risk that might attack ours. So an interceptor to intercept something coming at you, for example. But none of that works if the adversary can't see it. One of my favorite movies is Dr. Strangelove. Anybody seen the movie? Okay. So, I mean, Stanley Kubrick was the director on that. I'm convinced he read Schelling and Kahn, who were the two great theorists on nuclear deterrence in the 1960s, the two great schools of thought. And at the end of the movie, when Slim Pickens rides the nuclear weapon into Russia, and Peter Sellers is the president of the United States, and the Russian ambassador's there, and the Russian ambassador says, this is terrible, Mr. President, and Peter Sellers says, well, of course it is, and you know, Dmitry, we worked so closely to try to prevent this from happening. We even helped you try to shoot down that plane before it got there. He goes, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He says, what? He says, I'm talking about the doomsday weapon. What's that? Well, it's this weapon we just fielded last month in the Soviet Union, where if a nuclear weapon goes off on our territory that's not one of ours, it launches everything at the United States that we have. And the president says, you know, Dmitry, it does you no good to have that capability if you don't tell us about it. You have to reveal at least some, not necessarily all, but you have to reveal at least some of this capabilities so that the adversary wakes up in the morning and says, is this a good day to attack the United States in space? No. Every day. That's how you deter.
Well, you know, that leads to a follow-up question. As the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, this was an issue you lived with every day.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and one other thing, when I was commander of Strategic Command, we not only had the nuclear deterrence mission, but we also had the space and cyber mission in those days. And so it was in, you know, after leaving Air Force Space Command and then going to be the combatant commander responsible for space, cyber, and nuclear deterrence, we absolutely thought about it every day. And I knew we didn't have the capabilities in place to deter attacks on our space assets. I knew we had the capabilities to deter attacks on the homeland with our nuclear forces, for sure.
Okay, I'm reading the cards here. By the way, we're going to go ahead and take some from the audience, so if you got a question.
Yeah. Oh, please, sir.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Would you stand up, sir?
Okay. From what I'm understanding, we were very slow to start thinking about war in space, whereas Russia and China apparently have a great head start on us. Are we closing the gap?
Well, I can't say for sure. We made a huge step in recognizing the problem. I mean, you can't solve it unless you admit that you have one, right? And there's a lot of work going on in designing and developing capabilities. But a lot of them are so classified, I'm not read in on. I'm retired now. But at some point, you got to show those capabilities to deter, right? So there's two pieces of this puzzle. One is actually developing the capabilities that we said we would not do forever, but then changed our mind, appropriately so. And then deciding how much of that you want to reveal so that you don't show everything you have, so they can develop counters, but you show enough to create doubt in their mind. But as to where we are exactly right now, I think the good news is we've woken up, we've recognized the problem, we've organized for the problem, and now we got to push it up, as we'd say in the fighter pilot world, advance the throttles on fielding capabilities that puts that doubt in our adversaries' minds.
So I mentioned in passing in the intro kind of a humorous comment on SpaceX and Elon Musk, but he's done an incredible job with the Starlink constellation, which he says that's going to be the revenue generator to get him to Mars. That's another question. But what is that? What's the role of commercial space in our overall space enterprise? How does that play into your?
Yeah, I think we have to absolutely leverage it. Look, we utilize commercial, you name it, in just about every other domain. If this country goes to war, mobilizes to go to war, we use commercial rail to move our armies from their bases to their ports of embarkation. We use civilian airliners to move people overseas. We actually use satellites that are operated by civilian companies to augment our communications capabilities. And so this is not new to have relationships between the Department of Defense and commercial industry. I think what Elon's Starlink is demonstrating today is a couple of things. He envisions 4,000 satellites eventually in these constellations. He has, I think, less than 1,000 up there now, but even with that, those numbers, he's providing capabilities to even the Ukrainians, for that matter, to allow them to continue to have communications capability even though they're under attack on the terrestrial level. So I think there's great promise to it. I think, again, like every other domain, it's not that different, that we shouldn't avoid doing the same things we do in air, land, and sea. and utilize the great strength of our industrial base and commercial industry. It will require making agreements and commitments, but we know how to do this. So I'm totally supportive of it, and I think it may actually be a way to accelerate catching up. There's no way the Chinese are going to be able to shoot down 4,000 satellites. And so that's part of this resilience plan. How do you make their ability to remove the capability more difficult? And there is some quality to quantity.
Question, Bob?
Joe, we have a cadet who would like to ask a question.
All right.
Yes.
So I had a question regarding like your thoughts on like robotics coming into like space and stuff instead of like having pilots actually in space. Like, what are your thoughts on like robotics?
Well, we already have robotic capability in space, so I think it's great. And it's a great question. Thank you for that. When I was at NASA flying on the space shuttle, we had a Department of Defense shuttle mission, and one of the questions that they sought to answer was there a role for military people in space? And we used the space shuttle on that particular mission. It launched a Department of Defense satellite, but we had a crew member. I wasn't on the flight, but there was a crew member who did some coordination with the ground and trying to do different things that they thought might be able to have meaningful capability to support land and sea operations. And the conclusion was no. We could actually do all of that stuff robotically already, whether it's taking photographs from space or whatever. And since then, we have actually, we had a robot arm on the space shuttle that we operated with humans, but the United States has demonstrated launching satellites with robotic arms that can be controlled from the ground. And so I personally don't, and I may be short-sighted on this, see a role for uniformed guardians in the Space Force to be in space to do these missions that I've talked about. I think we can do it all from the ground through these links that I talked about, communication links, which is why they're so important. We talk about a lot about our UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. Many of them, if you just take the satellite link away, they don't know where to go. They're being flown by someone on the ground on the other side of the world, but that signal is going through a satellite. So again, it's really important that we not only protect the satellite, we protect that link capability. Thanks, that was a great question.
Here's a couple that came in through the mailbox. We talk about Russia and China as our adversaries in space, but there are lots of other spacefaring nations out there that might have ambitions toward our assets. But how long do you think it would be before other second-tier powers are able to field a threat, either alone or through combining capabilities with like-minded third countries?
I don't see anybody on the horizon that I would call an adversary that's operating in space. In fact, we have a lot of good friends that are operating in space, and that's to our advantage. Our alliances are tremendously important to us. I ask people, we have great allies in NATO. We have great allies with the Japanese, the Australians, our relationships with countries like Thailand and the Philippines and the Far East, all of NATO. I ask people, who are Russians' allies?
Yeah.
Belarus. That's a strength that we have that they don't have. Just in the paper today, I read how they're snuggling up with Iran. That's not good. If they set up an alliance with Iran, that's not good for anyone in the free world. Who are China's allies? North Korea? Maybe. Who is North Korea's allies? Nobody. So, our alliances are so important, and we have spacefaring allies. The French, the European Space Agency, which has multiple players in it. The United Kingdom is gearing up their program. Australia is really important. Australia doesn't launch anything into space. But believe it or not, geography matters in space. Remember, I said you got to keep track of what's up there. It means you got to have ground-based sensors looking up into space to see what's flying up there. Turns out Australia is a great friend, wants to be involved, and it supports us with sensors deployed in the southern hemisphere on their continent. And they share that data with us. It's incredibly valuable. So a long answer to your question, Sue, but I'm racking my brain on anybody who I think, is a spacefaring nation today, which is India, who's not an enemy of the United States in any way, shape, or form. It's Japan, it's France. I boil down to the two I worry about is Russia and China.
Well, my next question is going to be on the importance of alliances to projection of power in space. I think you sort of answered that. I know you've had some conversations with the space leaders in other countries. Any observations from us?
So I'll tell you a quick story. It was, I think it was in 2006, and I had just taken command of Air Force Space Command. And the French were developing a ground-based radar that could look up into space and detect space objects and help build a catalog of what was up there. It was a new capability for them. We already had that capability. And we were sharing, and we do share information about what's in space, but we don't share everything because we do have some classified things up there that we don't want to tell the bad guys where they are. We want them to have to figure that out. And the French were not happy about this. And they made an announcement that they said, if you don't tell us everything that's up there, when we turn this radar on, we're going to tell the world that's everything that's up there. And I thought, why are we doing this to each other? We're friends. So I went over and spoke with the head of the French Air Force, who their space command supported. And when I met him, I recognized him. This gets back to the importance of human relationships. When I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, there was a French exchange cadet. It was him. He was now the chief of the French Air Force, General Abriel. Wonderful man. And we were in the same dormitory. I mean, he was 2 floors above me in the same part of the dormitory at the Air Force Academy. And we started sharing stories. And just had this great relation. And then I brought up this issue, and he goes, well, of course that doesn't make sense. Because France will have some things up there we don't want you to talk about. And you'll have things up there that you don't want us to talk about. Surely we can work that out. And I think we did. And it's a great partnership now. On that very same trip, I went to Germany and asked if they would be interested in participating, because they had great radar capability, space-based radar capability to image the Earth. They weren't at the time because it wasn't in their military, it was in their scientific community. But now you see the Germans coming on board. They want to help out. Talk to the United Kingdom. They didn't have really much of anything except a communications satellite. Now they're active participants. So our allies are turning to because they understand the threat, not only to space assets, but they understand the threat to freedom if China goes off and does what they say they want to do, which is become the world superpower by 2050 and take Taiwan before 2030.
Okay, there we go. Joel, got a microphone? Hang on.
I can hear you.
We want to get it for our
posterior.
for our tape.
How far away from Earth, perhaps this is a little outlandish question, how far away from Earth can a satellite be and still be effective for defense or communication purposes? Do you have any idea?
Well, let me answer a different question, but it may be similar. I always said if you wanted to really hide something in space, and this is back when I was in the service, the best place to hide it was in orbit around the moon. Because the amount of energy or fuel it takes to go from the moon back to our geosynchronous orbit, which is where our communication satellites are, the amount of fuel it takes to come back to there is the same amount of fuel as it takes to launch and go up to that geosynchronous. And nobody looks at the moon. Why would you waste any energy looking at what's in orbit or around the moon? So it was actually a great place for an unwarned Pearl Harbor kind of attack, was to put things in orbit around the moon and then come down. We'd never see them because we're not looking there, and they could attack our communications satellites in geosynchronous orbit. So, which led me to, and now we're seeing it, you'll hear the combatant commander today, General Dickinson of U.S. Space Command, talking about the need to understand what's going on in what you'll hear the term cislunar space, which means from Earth out to the lunar orbit, and actually beyond to the Lagrange points that you were talking about earlier, like where the Webb telescope is. So in the past, we only did space surveillance out to the geosynchronous level, which is about 23,000 miles above the surface of the Earth. Now we're going to have to start looking out 250,000 miles to the moon, and any place that an adversary could put a threat capability. Hope that answers your question in some form or fashion. So there's utility at all ranges. Yes?
Thank you. I'm in general aviation. We're very, very dependent on GPS, as is commercial aviation.
Yes.
Is our military applications that you're talking about tied in with the GPS that we use for commercial and general aviation? Or, because if you took out GPS for commercial aviation, you'd create a catastrophic situation. And one of the things that's happening is the FAA is doing away with VORs. They've already done away with ADF. And so if you lost the GPS with the loss of VORs that we have, you'd have a catastrophic navigation problem.
I agree. And they took away Loran as well for our naval forces and Coast Guard forces. So again, GPS is so convenient. And now it's like crack cocaine for us. I mean, we are hooked on it. And it's no longer just a convenience, it's a dependency. And no, it's the same satellites that support our military, that provide the signals that support our aviation, electronic grid, financial systems, Wall Street, think that. Even when you go and go to the gas station and you stick your credit card in there to get gas, if you take GPS away, that thing doesn't work. So you start thinking about the chaos that could be created if that signal is lost. It's a great point.
You actually already discussed this, but it's a question that came in via question card. Says, what is the plan for redundancy of command and control, communications and control, and does the moon play a part? Is that a safe haven?
Say that one more time at the end of that. Yeah.
Well, what's the plan for redundancy of command and control for our space enterprise, and does the moon play a part? And I hadn't thought about that, and
Yeah.
you brought up the point that's a great place to park something in
Right, in
sight.
orbit. No, I hadn't thought about it either. Perhaps the moon could play a role as a relay. There is a time delay involved in communicating at those ranges. It's a little slower than talking to something in low Earth orbit or even geosynchronous orbit. We need to be thinking about that. Just, in the nuclear enterprise, we don't rely on a single communication path for the president to talk to his nuclear forces. There are multiple paths that even work in the middle of a nuclear exchange. And it's because it's that important for the adversary to understand that no matter what they do, we will respond, and we can respond. That's part of deterrence. So I think, although not quite on the scale as the threat of a nuclear strike on the U.S., but certainly important in every other sense for conventional warfare and for our way of life, it's important for us to develop the redundant capability in being able to communicate with these satellites. Because just as I mentioned that as a vulnerability, the adversary will come after that capability as well. If they can take out the ground stations that we use to communicate with our satellites, they don't have to kill the satellite. They've killed the capability. And so it's really important as well.
So you mentioned earlier the need for provide training to our guardians so they understand they have the opportunity to train for war. One of the things that you and I went through as we were young fighter pilots was red flag,
Right.
which was basically provide the most realistic training possible and sort of simulate the first 10 missions in combat. Is there an analogy there that carries over to space?
Yeah, and by the way, red flag, if you've never heard of it, it's kind of like Top Gun, but better. Wouldn't you agree, Sue? They just beat us to Hollywood, doggone it, with a really good-looking actor. By the way, my wife and I went to see Top Gun Maverick. Who's seen it? Yeah, it's an entertaining movie. A good friend of mine, Dave Deptula, who runs the Mitchell Institute, recently said, "I'd just like to remind everyone in the audience that a single B-2 with one bomb could have done that mission." Didn't have to go through all that stuff, but it wouldn't have been as exciting, right? And my wife, who is a daughter of a fighter pilot, flight test engineer a lot of time in the F-16, married a fighter pilot, she said the most realistic thing about that movie were the bar scenes. She said, "I've been there." We absolutely need a red flag for space. And they do have one called Space Flag today, and they actually started doing these kinds of exercises a while ago. But they didn't have the computer systems to support them, so it was all done on paper, white card. Okay, you get a note that says your satellite's under attack, and you write back and say, "Oh, I can't do anything about it." I mean, it was kind of a war game without capability to include the simulators, which are driven by computers, fielded to address these things. So we need simulators that can train the individual operator. We need simulators that can train the generals who will command and control all those squadrons. We need simulators and ranges where we can go out and test things. We need to be able to present aggressor forces that are dedicated, kind of like in the original Top Gun, the pretend bad guys, so that you could train against an adversary without fighting them, someone who was on your side but pretended they were the other guy. We need that same capability in space. We need everything we need in every other domain, whether it's what we do out at Fort Irwin for the Army or what we do at Nellis for the Air Force at Red Flag. That realistic training is what we need for space, and it's a huge gap that has to be filled and invested in.
Joe, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. General, you mentioned in your comments earlier about space junk.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what steps we are taking to prevent loss of satellites, loss of life, loss of space stations.
Sure. So we track the space junk. The Space Force does that. They have a whole set of radars and optical systems around the world that keeps track of that. Now, there's a policy change that has been made. They haven't implemented it yet, but the tracking and, if you will, keeping track of debris as well as satellites in orbit is going to move from the Department of Defense to the Department of Commerce. Kind of like the FAA, right? The FAA. It doesn't mean that the military won't have those capabilities too, but they won't be spending so much time counting stuff up there as they will be thinking about how do I defend what I have up there and hold at risk my adversary. So the idea is to kind of unload the burden of, just like the FAA, keeps track of all the airplanes in the skies, but the military has radars to do the same mission if we go to war, right? To keep track of adversary aircraft, et cetera. So that's kind of the model we're moving toward. It hasn't happened yet, that responsibility hasn't shifted over, but that's one of the things we're thinking about. So today, depending on the size of the debris and the altitude of the debris, we can track it, and when we see what our potential collisions coming, we maneuver the International Space Station. And one of my missions we had to wake up in the middle of the night and do a firing to maneuver the shuttle, so we're taken away from the risk of hitting this piece of debris that had a high probability that we were going to run into it. But you can't see it all, because a lot of it's really small, and it's moving really fast. It really, at the end of the day, it's a game of probability and statistics, and the good news is space is a really big space. I mean, so the odds of getting hit are low, but the consequences of getting hit in some circumstances can be catastrophic. Yes, sir.
Scott.
I'm curious, as we head down the home stretch here, you have shared just an incredible amount of information with us. Some of it I'm going to remember, some of them I don't have a clue what you were saying.
Sorry, my bad.
Well, and I'm sure everybody in here, my hat's off to you, all the information and the knowledge that you have. So here's my question to you. 2 parts. First thing, what is it that when you go home at night, you know all this information. You've been there 24/7. You know what's going on in the Air Force and in our military and in our country and in space. So what is the thing that concerns you most, or that we should be concerned about? And secondly, as we all walk out that door, what is the take-home that you want us to remember most and say, you're a citizen of the United States of America. You better keep this in mind and be smart in any way that you can help move forward so we all can be safe, this is what it is.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think what I worry about most is miscalculation on the part of our adversaries, that they will miscalculate, that they will wake up one morning and go, no, today's the day we do attack Taiwan. And that would be a very, very tough fight for us, because the Chinese have not only fielded capabilities to hold our assets at risk, they have fielded capabilities in space and missile capabilities that are specifically designed to find, track, and kill our carriers and our capital ships at sea. They've developed things that in space and airplanes and missiles that are specifically designed to make sure our aircraft cannot get within 200 miles of the Straits of Taiwan without being at great risk of being destroyed. And so I worry that they miscalculate and think, if not now, when? Because maybe we're a little bit ahead of the U.S. They may be wrong. Remember, there's things that might be going on that, trust me, I don't know about. I've been retired for 11 years now. I pray God we've got some classified programs out there that are the kind of things like stealth became, right? Just came out of the blue, and boy, did that change the game. That's my biggest worry. I think what I would want everybody in the room tonight to go away with is that space is no different than a terrestrial combat requirements. What we need in space, and what we need for the Space Force to have, and U.S. Spacecom to be able to use, are the same sorts of things we need in the United States Army, the United States Navy, the United States Marine Corps, the United States Air Force. The same training for our people, the same capabilities to defend our assets and maintain our ability to move freely in space and hold our adversaries' assets at risk. So if they dare come after them, we will level the playing field to make sure that we're not fighting at a disadvantage. And we need that situational awareness and intelligence to understand the threat and what they're posturing to do perhaps in the future. So treat the space domain just like we treat the Army, Navy, and Air Force Marines. Make those investments. It's not cheap, but it's important because it's an incredible vulnerability that would affect not only commercial aviation, but every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine in their operational plans today. I mean, when I started flying the RF-4C in 1979, I navigated with a compass, a ground speed indicator, a map, and a stopwatch. And I was good. I was really good. I could take a picture of any one of these tables from 500 feet at 500 knots. I don't care where you put it. Just tell me the coordinates. I'll take a picture of it. We've forgotten how to do that because we haven't had to do it for the last 25 years. We stopped teaching it, in fact.
So we're going to take a couple more. Let's get one from the audience right over here.
As a lifelong civilian, thank you to you and everyone else who served. We're so grateful.
Thank you.
Three-part question. You said we're behind. You also said you've been retired for 12 years, but people at your status stay connected. In your best, worst case, best case scenario, how long does it take, assuming our adversaries are not slowing down in what they're trying to do to catch up? Are we recreating the wheel in our plan, or do we know what we need to do exactly and there's a plan in place? And three, is this current White House and Congress, because the money, you can't do anything without the appropriations, are they behind this?
Yeah, so what was the first one?
It took me that long to remember.
I'll work it backwards. The funding is coming. We are, so it's being supported. The question of speed, I think, is important. And if we continue to do things the way we normally do things, we'll probably never catch up. But I'm encouraged by there's a lot of innovation out there led by the commercial industry. People like, SpaceX, et cetera, who can and have demonstrated that they can do things quickly. And it's a different acquisition model. It's a different development model of developing new systems. And I'm encouraged that the Department of Defense and the Space Force in particular is serious about leveraging those capabilities. When I was a youngster, I remember when I was at test pilot school, this colonel in charge of us gave us a lecture on how long it took to build an airplane. And at that time, I think it was taking 11 years from idea to actually having rubber on the ramp. And so we had a bunch of legislation called acquisition reform. And so the next one, so we could speed that up, and the next airplane took 20 years. So I'd caution, Congressman, anytime you hear someone talk about acquisition reform, sometimes we slow things down rather than speed things up by adding layers of oversight. And what was your first question? I'm sorry, yeah.
The first question was, or the middle question was, do we actually have a plan? In other words, okay, so you're talking to,
Yes,
I'm a construction guy?
Yeah.
I get a plan?
Right, I got it. Do we have a strategy? Do we have a plan?
Yes.
And yes, we do. And we've actually put some brain power behind developing the capabilities I've talked about today, which would be more resilient constellations that could survive an attack and continue to function. And that's probably where we've put most of our emphasis. I'd say where I've been most disappointed is the silence I hear, crickets, if anybody starts talking about developing offensive capability, which I absolutely think is essential. I don't know of any case in history where a nation has deterred another adversary from attacking them by solely investing in defense. The Maginot Line is a classic example in history. You have to have offensive capability that threatens the adversary, or they will not be deterred. There's never been a castle built with high enough walls or thick enough walls that someone wouldn't try to take it down. But if you can prevent them from even getting to the moat, because you have offensive capability, then they're deterred.
That's a great lead into my next to last question for you. And if I have my timing right, in November of 2021, the Russians demonstrated their direct ASAT
They did, yes.
ASAT capability. In April of 2022, and obviously that sent a signal to us as they prepare to go into Ukraine. In April, we announced our policy banning the testing of direct ASAT weapons. So what kind of signal, politics aside, what kind of signal does that send?
Well, I was involved a little bit in the discussions of that. In fact, I was asked to endorse that policy in an open letter, but I chose not to. Not because I think it's necessarily a bad policy. So first of all, it's a unilateral thing where we've said we will not test weapons that create debris in space. We also have a policy that says we won't test our nuclear weapons. Doesn't mean we don't have nuclear weapons. And nor should this policy, this testing policy, deter us from fielding what we need to deter and win. And if that's something that creates debris, I'll create debris to save sailors. So I'm okay with a statement like that, just as I'm okay with the fact that we have a test ban that we abide by and have proposed actually and led, and we're doing the same thing because it's irresponsible to create debris in the environments, in peacetime environments. But when you get into a war and survival is at stake, you need to be prepared to win. And if that's what it takes to win, we should have them. And we know we can do it because we demonstrated it with the F-15 in 1985. We never fielded that capability. We put it back on the drawing board. And in 2008, when I was commander of STRATCOM, we conducted Operation Burnt Frost, where U.S. Strategic Command, with our space components, launched a SM-3 off a Navy cruiser in the Pacific and intercepted National Reconnaissance Office satellite. not to demonstrate a space weapon, but because that satellite was going to re-enter with a frozen tank of hydrazine that was about 3 feet in diameter, that the engineers told us would survive re-entry, and if it impacted the ground anywhere near a human being, it would either kill them or severely injure them. And the President of the United States directed us to intercept that satellite and prevent it from hitting the Earth. And we did it. In fact, we hit the tank inside the satellite. So we know we can do these things, and the adversary knows we can do these things. We don't need to test to do these things. But we should have the capability, I believe, in case of conflict. The other thing I think we need to invest in, by the way, in this area is directed energy. I think directed energy has always been just 5 years away. Just 5 more years we're going to have it for the last 40 years. There's actually been some great breakthroughs recently that hold a promise of being able to use directed energy to hold satellites at risk. And the beauty of that is you can do it in such a way so as to not create debris. Just make certain components stop working because of a high energy pulse, whether it's electromagnetic or laser. And now you have a capability, as I described is necessary earlier, to make the adversary think, I better not go to war because they can take us out. And they won't be deterred from doing it because they can do it without creating debris.
Any more? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have one more question for you. Our adversaries, my understanding is our adversaries don't have any budgets as far as military spending, that they will spend whatever they need to spend to get what they need. In our country, we have budgets. Is there any reason why we pay contractors, defense contractors, billions and zillions of dollars to create things for us, and then they go and sell that to other entities, whether it be for military or civilian use? Is there any way we can get royalties on those sales?
Well, a couple points. One, the other countries, even China and Russia, do have budgets, and they are constrained. China is probably the least constrained because they're making so much money. I mean, their GDP's been growing at about 6 to 8% a year for the last decade. It's slowed to about 3% growth. We're sitting at about 2 and have been for the last decade, I think, annually. It's just that we have a bigger denominator. We're still the biggest, but they're coming fast. They're a freight train. And it's not all going to defense spending, but they have the excess capital to spend on defense. Russia, not so much, which is why you see how poorly Russia's doing in Ukraine today. I would suggest this superpower is being taken to school by a very small country with not a very big defense budget. Getting a lot of help, but still. So they do have budgets. Our corporations, that's what runs America. My father was a corporate guy, worked for Douglas Aircraft. He always said to me, son, I'm as patriotic as anybody in uniform. I build fighter jets, I build missiles, I build things for the defense of this nation. And so I think our corporations are actually one of our great strengths. Elon Musk is a corporation, SpaceX. And when it comes to sale of capabilities, if there's any military utility to that, and this gentleman here would know this because he was in the job, General Brewer, it has to be approved by the United States of America. So a Lockheed can't develop a new bomb, airplane, whatever, and go sell it to country X without getting an export authority from the U.S. government, which includes the Department of Defense gets a vote and the State Department gets a vote on whether it goes. And so we sell stuff to our allies, but we don't sell stuff to the bad guys. And it's good, because if we're going to fight with our allies, it's great when we all have the same equipment. Yep. I mean, no, I'm serious. You know, from a logistics standpoint, you know, if everybody's flying F-16s, they all drop the same bombs, they all shoot the same missiles, they all need the same piece parts to be maintained. That's a really strong alliance, opposed to an alliance that everybody has a unique airplane that is really hard to continue to support once the shooting starts. Does that answer your question?
I'm just thinking, back when we first started the space program, if we had royalties on Teflon, we'd all be retired.
We have a question from one of our cadets here.
Howdy, sir. From what I understand with the Air Force, I know that air superiority is key in a lot of instances in regards to the efficiency of our ground troops, whether land or sea. Do you think the same applies within space, and is the space the ultimate key to victory in a conflict that we could potentially get into?
Well, you should have given my speech. Now, it's a great question. And when you think about air superiority, the Air Force doesn't field capability to get air superiority for the sake of air superiority. We get air superiority so that our land forces don't have to be worried about being strafed or bombed by adversaries. Our ships at sea don't need to be worried about being attacked by airplanes from the skies. We get air superiority to enable the other joint parts of the joint operation, air, land, sea, to operate. And it enables us, the Air Force then, to attack our adversaries, to provide close air support, to interdict targets deep. That's why we get air superiority. We don't do it just for air superiority. It's for another purpose. The same thing is true in space, I believe. And I believe, as I described tonight, if we don't have superiority, we better at least be able to eliminate their capabilities when they eliminate ours. And then it's back to fighting like World War II. And we'll win that fight because we're better trained and equipped than our adversaries. But if they have their space capabilities, if they have space superiority and we don't, I don't know if we win. I believe we lose a lot of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in that scenario. So space superiority is important in my view, and fundamental. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
One more for the audience, and we'll go ahead, sir.
Do I get to ask? Okay. Just to build on the gentleman's question around strategy and plan. Now, in every initiative, there's a sense of readiness and a sense of urgency. Now, just because we have a strategy and a plan, that doesn't mean we're ready and we have that level, that sense of urgency. In your opinion, do we have the right level of readiness and the right sense of urgency?
Without a doubt, the sense of urgency is there, both in the U.S. Space Force and in U.S. Space Command. The commanding generals of those two organizations, they have a sense of urgency. And I believe their people do too. And I think you see a new sense of focus too, now that they have a separate service with their own colors and, mottos and song now. That they're totally committed and focused on this. Their challenge will be to finish their plan, defend their plan on Capitol Hill, frankly, because they control the purse strings, first in the Department of Defense, up through the White House to Capitol Hill, to get the funding they need to field the capabilities I've been talking about. But they get it. We have great leadership in the Space Force and at U.S. Space Command, and which is why I have every confidence we can do these things if we move out and do them.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this great program. And General Chilton, I want to thank you for spending so much of your time with us. It was very insightful. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott, and if you'll just stay on the stage here, we got a couple of things.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your patience. Appreciate it. Scott, thank you.
Did you enjoy that? Yeah, good stuff, huh? Well, General, that was outstanding, no question about that. And we are awed by your career experiences and certainly appreciate you giving us all that insightful discussion. It was really above and beyond, so we can't thank you too much. We have a couple of small gifts. This is like Oprah, right? We have takeaways, Okay. And the first one, though, knowing that you have enough plaques and pictures to probably fill a museum, we're going to make a donation in your name to the Wounded Airmen Program, sponsored by the Air Space Forces Association. As I said earlier, in addition, we'll donate our share of the 50-50 raffle as well. So that's going to go. That's going to go to you. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for those of you that might not know it, the Wounded Airmen Program provides a way to, well, for us all to show our appreciation for our airmen and guardians and their families who give literally so much every single day of their lives. So we much appreciate that. And secondly, we wanted you to have this embroidered shirt with the NDBS logo on it. Is this over here?
All right, great.
Here it is. This is the only one of its kind in the great state of Texas. So it's pretty good looking stuff, huh?
My mother told me you can go to hell for lying too, son.
Oh, really? Well, my mother used to tell me my nose was growing sometimes, something about Pinocchio, I don't know what, so.
That's nice.
What do you think, folks? It's pretty good, huh?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. No, thank
Appreciate
you. It was a real pleasure, a real honor. And thank you, obviously, for your service and for everything you've been a part of and continue, obviously, to be a part of as well. Now, before we conclude, I'd like to invite our ROTC and CAP cadets to come forward, okay? Please come forward and get to the stairs. Just stay down, right down, just below the stairs over on this side. And what we're going to do, we're going to get a group picture with the general as soon as we finish. So if you would just stand right over here on this side, right over here, that'll be great. And I know many of you in the audience would like to speak to the general, but please give us just a minute or so until we can get all the pictures done on the stage, and then you're more than welcome to do what you can. Last time he was here, he tried to sneak out the back door, so he didn't have to deal with that, but he said tonight he would stick around if you had some good questions. You've already asked all the questions anyway, my gosh. How many questions did you ask or answer? I mean, really, that was above and beyond. I was most impressed. I've been in this arena many, many times, and usually somebody after 3 or 4, you don't want to hear about it. You were very polite and very respectful of everybody, so thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, as I said before, we're not going to have an auction tonight, but we do have a couple of nice door prizes, so I'm going to invite the good general to come over here. Patty, where's Patty? I just was talking to her a minute ago. Oh, there she is. Can you bring those raffle tickets, or what you... we'll find out who's going to split the pot. And as I said, we are making a donation. The 50-50 raffle is going to go to the Wounded Airmen Program, and the other 50% is going to go to somebody right here, right? All right, now you've got to be here to win, right? Yeah, you got to be here. So we'll find out. You've got a microphone. Go ahead, General. You read the winner off.
The winning number is 220-8921. Oh, it's mine. No. Okay, so the last 4 are 8921, 8921. Paul. There he is.
Where are you? Okay, very good. Can I tell him how much you got, Patty? It was $255, is that right? We sold $510 worth of tickets, so you get $255. What's that? Make it zero? No, are you going to give it back? Are you serious? All right. So on behalf of the Wounded Airmen Program, I simply say to you, sir, thank you for your generosity. That's great. Well done. Merry Christmas to you, too. That's above and beyond. Thanks so much. And we also have a round of golf for 4 people right here at the beautiful Heritage Ranch. And this has been donated by our hosts here at the Heritage Ranch. So, General, if you'd like to do that again, do you have, can you come back up here, Patty? Come on back up here. All right, stay up here because we've got a couple of other things. I probably should have saved the 50-50 raffle for the cash for last, but we were so excited to find who it was going to be. All right, so this is a round of 4, and if you don't play golf, the good general will be more than happy to take you around, right?
I don't.
No, you don't play golf either. Okay.
220-8860. The last 4 are 8860.
There he is. Yeah. Congratulations, sir.
There you go.
And last but not least, we have a signed, numbered, and professionally framed print by renowned Nebraska wildlife artist. I told you about him a little earlier. Neil Anderson, donated by AFA member Bill Harding. And this is one of the, right here, this is the one that we showed you earlier today on the screen. This is called Wood Duck Drape. And Wood Duck Drape is one of a series that Neil did for Ducks Unlimited. So go ahead, General. We'll find out who it's going to be.
And this number is 220. Last 4 are 8897. 8897.
Nobody here, they already left.
8897?
You'll have to tell them they missed out on it, okay? We don't know who it is, but that's all right. You can still tell them. All right, General, what do you got?
Okay, this one is 220, and the last four are 8883. 8883.
Is that yours, man?
All right.
Well, congratulations. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. That's fantastic. And also, what we'd like to do is have our sponsors and our NTPS members please come to the stage as soon as possible as we adjourn for a quick picture as well. After we have this picture, if you would just assemble down in this area as well. Thanks to all of you for attending. We hope it was a great day. Don't forget to mark your calendars. January 29th and April 2nd. Tell your friends we'd love to double the size of the crowd. So, okay, thanks everybody. Enjoy the upcoming holiday. Be safe and Happy New Year to you all. Thanks everybody.